right, so I used to live in America, and when I lived in America, I played rugby there. And the tradition when you play rugby in America is when you're hosting the other team, after the game, you have to take them back and shout them lunch. But when you're playing an away game, well, they have to do the opposite. They take you back to their place and they shout you a meal afterwards. So I remember one time we played in a small town in America, and after the game, the away team or the home team did what they're meant to do and usually do. They took us to their local pub and they shouted us lunch. And so we're enjoying lunch at their pub as per the tradition. And then while we were doing that, they had a gun raffle in the pub. Okay, this is going to have distance issues. All right, so there was a gun raffle in a pub. And that's when you think, surely only in America. So you know Australia, when you go to a pub, you might have a meat tray and win meat. In America, you can walk out with a gun. You can win a gun while you're at the pub. And that is amazing because up until now, I would have thought surely there are two things in this world that should not mix. Guns and alcohol should not mix. And there are many things in life that don't mix. Guns and alcohol, water and oil shouldn't mix. PCs and Macs shouldn't mix. Coke and Pepsi don't mix. And maybe we feel the same about Christian faith and science. Faith and science don't mix. One of the biggest hurdles to believing the Christian faith is this: the problem of science. How can the Christian faith and science mix together? And so tonight, I've been asked by Ray to come and give a topical talk on Christian faith and science and how the two can mix. What is a Christian response to the problem of faith and science? So I've been asked to give a 30-minute talk, and afterwards there'll be about 5 minutes of question and answer, and there's a number that comes up every now and then on the slides, and you text your questions to that number. So tonight is a topical talk. It's not your usual expository talk. I'm using the tools of systematic theology rather than biblical exegesis. So we're looking at the topic of Christian faith and science, because the Christian faith can seem really unscientific and anti-reason. For the Bible reading, I deliberately chose the story of Lazarus. Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. You are never going to get this story written up in a scientific journal, because you would have to suspend all reason to believe this story. If we start believing this story, Jesus raising someone from the dead, we'll also have to believe in unicorns and fairy godmothers. This is the 21st century. We don't believe in magic potions. We don't have witches. And yet the Bible has stories like this: miracles, people rising from the dead, a supernatural God, angels. So how can we Christians believe stuff like this? It's just so unscientific. How can the Christian faith and science ever mix? So there are going to be two parts to my talk tonight. In the first part, I'm going to look at what is science. And in the second part, a little bit longer, can the Christian faith coexist with science? And you can see the outline in your bulletin there. So let's come to the first part of the talk. What is science? Well, I am of the sciences. I did science subjects for my HSC like any good Asian: physics, chemistry, 4-unit maths. I studied 5 years of medicine. I worked as a doctor, and I still work as a medical doctor. So what is science? Well, science is at least three things. Number one, science is based on observations and evidence. Science is based on observations and evidence. I remember one night when I was working as a doctor, a man came into the hospital because he had crushed his foot in some machinery. So we spent all night operating all night operating on the foot. And while we're operating, a little bone fell out from the foot and it landed on the floor. And we looked at it and we thought, we don't know what to do with that bone. And here's the problem with the foot. There's so many little bones, and they're so hard to remember. And when you study medicine, like it's the same for all of us, isn't it? We begin with the head, We study the head, then we study the chest. Chest is really important. Then we study the abdomen. Abdomen is really important. But then the exams are on to you now, and there's no time to study the legs and the feet, so we never study the feet. And there's only going to be 1 or 2 questions on the feet anyway. The money's going to be up on the head and the chest. So you skip the feet, don't worry about it, it's just 1 or 2 questions. And so now this bone falls out, and I think, which one is it? Like, we can't tell. We can't remember. It was so many years ago since we studied it in anatomy. So we had to get the nurse to get a chart. We said, get us a chart. And so we had to hold up the little bit of bone, line up on the foot there. I think it's that one. I don't know. I'm not so sure. So it was like reverse Jenga. We had to squeeze it in the foot, just drill it in, screw it in, and just hope it held and didn't fall out. So that's medicine, that's science. We need physical, hard evidence. It's not based on hearsay. It's not based on stories or emotions. It's based on hard physical evidence. When you go to the doctor and say, I think I'm having a heart attack, the doctor doesn't go, oh no, that's terrible. How do you feel about that within yourself? No, they say, prove it. Prove it. Is there a heart attack or is there not a heart attack? The doctor says, get me an x-ray. Give me a blood test. Get me an ECG. I want hard, physical, empirical evidence. So number 1, science is based on hard, physical, empirical evidence. We have to see it, touch it, and feel it. It's not based on emotions, stories, or hearsay. Number 2, science makes claims that are repeatable, testable, and that make accurate predictions. I remember in high school, we used to have this experiment where you burn strips of magnesium and it produces this pure, white, intense flame. And I don't know what that experiment was meant to prove, but I do know all we did for the rest of the lesson was just burn strips and strips of magnesium over and over and over again. And that's what science is. We set up experiments that are repeatable. You should be able to do it over and over and over again. And they should be testable. You should be able to set up a counter experiment to prove or disprove my experiment. And our experiments should make reliable predictions. So I've burnt magnesium, it produced a pure white flame. I predict the next time I do it, it's going to do it again, and sure enough, it does. That's science. We make claims that are repeatable, testable, and that make accurate predictions. Number 3, science is linked with the use of reason. The Western scientific revolution occurred in the 16th century with a man like Francis Bacon with his inductive scientific method. And this gave birth to a movement called empiricism. We observe things, and from that we abstract general theories and we make hypotheses. That's a scientific revolution and the scientific method. Science is also associated with the Western Enlightenment, which gave birth to the movement called rationalism, where we use reason rather than rely on traditional authority, such as parents, religion, or tradition. Because of science, we're no longer superstitious. We believe in atoms, gravity, electrons, but we don't believe in Santa Claus or goblins. Science has set us free to progress because we're no longer locked into closed, deductive thinking. Because of science, we can discover new things. Immanuel Kant, an Enlightenment philosopher, said, dare to reason, dare to be free. And because of that, because we have dared to use reason, dare to be free, we have discovered new things, we've invented new things. Science has given us the microwave, it's given us mobile phones, it's given us medicines. Before the scientific revolution, women died in childbirth. Children died in the first month from infections. People died in their 40s. But now, because of science and medicine, we expect to live up to 80, 90, 100, all thanks to science. So science is a wonderful thing, and we need to be more scientific, not less scientific. So that's the first part of the talk. What is science? And I've told you 3 things that science is. We rely on hard evidence, we rely on experiments, and it's linked with the use of reason. So let's come to the second part of the talk now. Can the Christian faith coexist with science? And here I've got 9 things to say. Number 1, well, yes, because many Christians are scientists and many scientists are Christians. In American football, the most important player is the quarterback. And 50 years ago, there were no black quarterbacks in the NFL because of the prejudices at the time. It was thought that you can't be black and a quarterback at the same time. But now, almost 30% of quarterbacks are black. And it shows that it was nonsense. You can't be black and a quarterback at the same time. The idea that you couldn't was just based on unfair stereotypes and misinformation. Well, what about having faith and being a scientist? Well, each time they do surveys, they find that 40% of scientists believe in a supernatural God. This survey was done in the early 1900s and also the late 1900s. So in a room of 10 scientists, 4 of them will believe in a supernatural God. So it's nonsense that you can't have religious faith and also be a scientist at the same time. You can believe in God and be a scientist. 40% of scientists do. So the idea that you can't believe in God and be a scientist is probably based on unfair stereotypes, misinformation. Ironically, it's an unscientific claim because if you did a scientific experiment, you would prove that 40% of scientists believe in a supernatural God. So what's going on here? Well, number 2, what does it mean to have faith? What is faith? Well, the English language is tricky because we have 2 words. We have faith and believe, but really they're 2 words for the same thing. And so faith seems this weird thing, but it's not because belief isn't. We all believe things to be true. We all have faith because we all believe things to be true. True or false? Today is Sunday. True. I believe today is Sunday. I have faith today is Sunday. True or false? I am in Sydney. True. I believe I'm in Sydney. True or false? Canberra is the capital of Australia. True. I believe Canberra is the capital of Australia. I have faith. We all have faith in truth claims. The problem isn't having faith. This is the problem. Philosophers distinguish between blind faith, unreasonable faith, and reasonable faith. Blind, unreasonable versus reasonable faith. The question isn't whether or not we have faith, because we all have faith. The question is it a blind, unreasonable faith, or is it a reasonable faith? Let's say I say to you, I believe it's raining in Melbourne right now. I have faith it's raining in Melbourne right now. Your question to me now would be, how do you know it's raining in Melbourne? And if I said, well, I know it's raining in Melbourne right now because I saw it on graffiti on the toilet door. It's raining in Melbourne. You say, you don't have faith. That's a blind, unreasonable faith. If I said, I know it's raining in Melbourne right now because my big toe is sore and my big toe always hurts when it rains in Melbourne, you would go, that's garbage. Okay, that's a blind, unreasonable faith. But if I said, I know it's raining in Melbourne right now because there's a webcam that shows me it's raining in Melbourne. My brother lives in Melbourne. He's just rung me up and said, it's raining in Melbourne right now. You would say, okay, I grant you that faith. That is a reasonable faith rather than a blind, unreasonable faith. So the question about the Christian faith is this: is our belief in Jesus Christ a blind, unreasonable faith, or is it a reasonable faith? Is there sufficient reason to believe the Christian faith about Jesus? Because if there is sufficient faith to believe the Christian faith, this will be the difference between believing in Jesus and believing in unicorns and fairy godmothers. Belief in unicorns is blind and unreasonable, but belief in Jesus is reasonable. So now our question is this: how do we work out whether it's reasonable to believe in Jesus? Number 3, much of what we believe actually doesn't come to us from scientific proof. Much of what we believe actually doesn't come to us from scientific proof. If I go home tonight and my wife of 18 years greets me at the door, hugs me and says, I love you, what do I say? Do I say to her, prove it? Give me a repeatable scientific experiment to prove it. Give me an x-ray, give me a blood test, give me an ECG, prove that you love me. Well, I don't do that because scientific proof is only good for proving scientific truth claims. But there are other truth claims that we cannot prove from science. There are many things we believe to be true that we can't prove from science. True or false? It's wrong for a white man to discriminate against a black man. True, it's wrong, but prove it. Give me a scientific test that will prove it's wrong to discriminate against a black man. True or false? It is wrong for a man to rape a woman. True, of course it's wrong for a man to rape a woman. Well, prove it. Give me scientific proof to prove that claim. True or false? It is good for us to give to those who are less advantaged than us. True, of course it's good to give to those less advantaged. Well, prove it. Give me a scientific proof to believe this. True or false? My wife loves me. How can I prove this with science? So what we realize here, much of what we believe and know to be true, we can't prove from science alone. So how do we know things to be true if science can't do it? Number 4, much of what we believe is based on trusting what someone else tells us. Much of what we believe comes because we trust what someone else tells us. Now, in this room, now it's going to go too far. No, it's like trying to correct a canoe. Don't go too far. Stay in that one. Okay, good. All right. For this to work, I need to see hands. Hands up, who believes water boils at 100 degrees Celsius? All things being equal, sea level, blah, blah, blah. I know, okay. So, okay, sea level, pure water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, I'm thinking everyone in this room believes that. True. We all believe this to be true. Hands up, who's actually done the experiment and proven it boils 100 degrees Celsius? Who here has done it? Hands down, you've never looked at it and done it. Wow. I think it's 10% of the room has done the experiment. So only 1 in 10 of us have actually done the experiment. The other 9 in 10 of us, we actually haven't done the experiment. But we somehow believe water boils 100 degrees Celsius simply because someone told us and we trust them at their word. Now, for those who did do the experiment, keep your hands up if it did boil exactly at 100 degrees. Wow, we're looking like 3 people. So we all did the experiment and it didn't boil at 100, did it? And at that stage we're going, okay, there's something wrong with my experiment. The water's not pure. I'm not at sea level. My thermometer's wrong because it should boil at 100 degrees Celsius. Why? Not because I can see it or prove it, because that's what they tell me. It should boil at 100 degrees Celsius. So much of what we believe and know to be true comes simply because we believe and trust what other people tell us. Even in science, we trust what other people tell us and not what we see with our own eyes. All right. Who here believes that World War I ended in 1918? This is a historical truth claim. Okay, let's see the hands. All right, okay. Almost everyone. Okay. Keep your hands up if you were there in 1918. Wow. Only one person. Okay. Wow. So for the rest of us, we believe this simply because this is what someone told us. We didn't see it. We can't prove it. We just believe what other people tell us. Okay. Hands up. Next slide. Who here believes they have a brain in their head? All right, hands up. Okay, keep your hand up if you've actually physically seen your own brain in your head. Wow, no one. So we all believe there's a brain in our head because that's what they tell us in the books. But we don't know, we've never seen it. And some of you are going, but I've done the CT scan and the MRI, I've seen my brain. How do you know that's really your brain in their CT scan? They haven't faked it. And how do you know how a CT machine works? Do you think the doctor knows? No one knows how those things work. We just use them, we just believe what scientists tell us. All right. And I know this can get tricky, and I'm not trying to be distasteful, but hands up who here believes our biological parents are our biological parents. The person who says their mum really is our mum. The person who says their dad really is our dad. Okay, who here has done the DNA test? Wow. So how do you know your mum really is your mum and your dad really is your dad? You haven't proven it scientifically. You've just trusted their word, haven't you? And you would only do the DNA test if the relationship broke down, like trust broke down. But right now, you are happy that trust is enough to go to your grave believing that your mum and dad really are your mum and dad. Yet it's not something we've scientifically proven. And when my wife says, I love you, this is a relational truth claim that I cannot prove by science. I'm just choosing to trust her on what she says. So this is number 4. Much of what we believe is actually based on trusting what someone else tells us. We trust this person, so we believe what they tell us. Number 5, we actually form our beliefs based on what's called an explanation of best fit. Number 5, much of what we believe is based on what they call an explanation of best fit. An explanation of best fit asks this question: does this explanation make sense? Does it fit my experience? Does it explain the evidence? And is it what someone I trust tells me? And that's the explanation of best fit. It's why most of us believe in the claims of global warming. Think about global warming. How do you prove this? It's proven by what they call an explanation of best fit. It seems to make sense, seems to fit my experience, it seems to explain the evidence, and it seems to be what people I trust, the scientists, tell me. How do I believe my wife loves me? Explanation of best fit. It seems to make sense, seems to fit my experience, it does explain the evidence, and my friends who I trust tell me, I think she loves you. It's an explanation of best fit. So much of our beliefs come from an explanation of best fit. Number 6, the Christian faith is also an explanation of best fit. It best fits the data. It best fits the idea that there's the existence of rational thought, also the existence of right and wrong, the existence of beauty and joy. It explains why we sense things aren't the way they should be. It explains why we sense there should be more to this life, like transcendence. It explains why there's something instead of nothing. It also explains how the Bible itself is coherent, consistent, and beautifully written. It explains the eyewitness accounts of Jesus. It explains the contemporary eyewitness accounts of Jesus. It explains the multiple contemporary eyewitness accounts of Jesus. It explains the historical phenomena, the change in the lives of the disciples, the growth of the early church in the first century. It explains why perhaps many of us have had religious experiences. Our prayers have been answered. God shows himself to us in many different ways. Perhaps we've had friends who have had lives changed by their belief in Jesus. So in this sense, the Christian faith is a reasonable faith. In the same way we would say it's reasonable to believe in global warming, the same way we would say it's reasonable to believe it's good to give to those less advantaged than us, in the same way we would say it's reasonable to believe my wife loves me, we would also say it's reasonable to believe, yes, there is a God. This God loves me. He sent Jesus to die for me. Jesus rose from the dead and now lives. His Spirit lives in me, and now I have a choice. Do I trust this God or don't I? So why do we think science and the Christian faith can't exist together? Well, number 7, science and the Christian faith are only a problem if we have what's called the God of the gaps. This is how the God of the gaps works. A God of the gaps explains what we can't explain by science. So once upon a time, we couldn't explain with science what causes lightning. We couldn't explain measles. We couldn't explain solar eclipses. And so we said, hey, it's God. God causes solar eclipses. So this is the God of the gaps, the God of the unexplainable. The problem is, now that science can explain these things, we no longer need the God of the gaps. And so this goes two ways now. Some well-meaning Christians try to hang on to the need for a God of the gaps by trying to find things that we can't explain by science and say, hey, we still need God because he can't explain that. And some people who don't want to believe in God, they use science to explain more and more and more things to say, hey, we don't need God because science can explain those things. But that's only a problem if we're talking about a God of the gaps. But this isn't what we're talking about. The God of the Bible isn't a God of the gaps. The God of the Bible is a God of both the explainable and the unexplainable. One of the greatest miracles in the Bible is the parting of the Red Sea. So how do we explain this miracle? Well, the Bible says God sent a wind to part the sea. And so there's a perfectly natural scientific explanation for the parting of the Red Sea. But there's still a supernatural explanation as well. God is the God of both the explainable and the unexplainable. And just because science can explain something doesn't mean there's no God. This is only a problem if we have a God of the gaps, but we don't have a God of the gaps. We have a God of the explainable and the unexplainable. Let's probe this even more deeply now with point number 8. Science and the Christian faith provide many causes for the same effect. Science deliberately limits itself to physical causes. That's all we're going to talk about. But the Christian faith looks at physical causes and what they call personal and purpose causes. Let's show how this works. Let's say I say to this, I can use science to prove that bananas come from banana trees. Therefore, there's no God. You say, whoa, that makes no sense at all. What if I said, hey, I can use science to prove that bananas come from banana trees, therefore there are no farmers? Well, what does that mean? Hey, I can use science to prove that bananas come from banana trees, therefore there's no such thing as love. Think, whoa, these are what they call category mistakes. Science is talking about physical causes, physical explanation, but here we're talking about personal and purpose clauses. You can still have farmers who plant banana trees to give you bananas because they love you, even though we can have science still to prove, hey, bananas come from banana trees. We're talking about multiple different causes. What caused the global financial crisis? Well, I'll give you the physical economic causes. It's the law of supply and demand, and there's an imbalance. Therefore, there's no such thing as bankers and borrowers or greed or desperation and no God. No, you don't get it. Economics is just limiting itself to these laws of supply and demand, but it's not making statements about persons and purposes. We're talking about multiple causes. What causes music? What causes music? Well, science would tell you, hey, it's vibration of air molecules. Therefore, there's no Mozart. There's no girl he loved when he composed his music. And there's no God who created Mozart. No. Science is just looking at physical causes. It's not saying anything about person and purpose causes. Or as John Lennox says, what causes his birthday cake? Well, science would tell you, hey, it's eggs, flour, butter, and sugar. But there are other causes. How about your mother made you this cake for your birthday because she loved you and God is behind it all? So we can't say, hey, science has proved that this cake comes from eggs, flour, butter and sugar. Therefore, there is no mother, there is no birthday, she doesn't love you and there's no God. No, we're talking about different causes. One is physical, the other personal purpose causes. And it's the same with science. Science can tell us what causes the universe, what causes the origin of life. But the Christian faith will also tell us that there's a God behind the science. There's a God who made us. He made us alive. He gave us his universe. Why? Because he loved us. So science is only looking at one cause. We're not looking at multiple causes. To say, hey, science says this, therefore there's no God, is as nonsensical as saying, hey, bananas come from banana trees, therefore there is no God. That's the same sort of nonsensical statement. All right, and finally, number 9, the Christian faith actually allows the possibility of science. Science itself is a faith-based claim. Science itself is a faith-based claim. Science needs 3 things to be true for science to work. It needs 1, the existence of other minds. 2, it needs our senses and memories to be reliable. And 3, it needs the universe to be repeatable and orderly. And yet science can't prove any of these things to be true. And yet science needs these 3 things to be true. But if there is a God that allows these three things to be true, the existence of other minds, senses and memory to be reliable, and that this universe is repeatable and orderly. This was a famous critique by an atheist philosopher called Bertrand Russell, and it was his critique of the scientific method. It's called the Christmas turkey critique. So imagine there's a turkey, and he's thinking, hey, the farmer fed me yesterday, the farmer fed me today, so based on science, what's he going to do? Feed me tomorrow, but no, because tomorrow is Christmas. So the turkey made the mistake of thinking every day is going to be just like the last day. Science requires every day to be just like the last day, but science can't prove that to be true. But if we have a God who's orderly, who loves us, then we can guarantee this to be true. So what have I been saying tonight? I'm trying to say this, that faith and science mix very well. Science itself is wonderful, but it's limited because by itself, science can't prove the very things that it's based on. This actually requires faith beyond what science can give us. And by itself, it cannot prove much of what we do believe to be true anyway. My wife loves me. It's wrong to discriminate. The Christian faith also should not be blind or unreasonable, but it needs to be a reasonable faith. We need to accept all forms of evidence, including science. Otherwise, we'll believe in unicorns and fairy godmothers. And most of what we believe comes to us by a process called the explanation of best fit. What best fits the facts, the evidence, the data, my experience, and what people I trust tell me. And based on that, the Christian faith is a reasonable faith because it too is an explanation of best fit. So let me conclude. When it comes down to it, much of what we believe is based on, do I choose to believe what someone I trust tells me? Even science itself is based on this sort of faith. Do I choose to believe what other scientists tell me? Do I choose to believe the very basic tenets of science, which science itself can't prove for me? And so it leaves us with two things to take home. Number one, if we only choose to believe what we can prove by science, we will have a very narrow, limited life. We can't believe in love, mercy, kindness, justice, or beauty. Again, science can tell you how this birthday cake happened chemically, but it can't tell you that your mum made it for you because she loves you and it's your birthday. And it's the same with the universe. Science can give us the origins of the universe, the origins of life, but it can't tell you that God made this universe for you because he loves you and he wants to know you personally. And the second thing is this. We go to our graves with only a belief beyond what science can tell us. When we die, there are really only two possible outcomes. There is life after death, or there's no life after death. We die and that's it. But we can't use science to tell us which one is true. You can't set up a repeatable, observable, testable experiment to show what happens to us after we die. So all of us, no matter how scientific or unscientific we are, we go to the grave with a decision based on who we're going to believe, not what science can tell us. I still remember my wedding day 18 years ago. I was trying to get ready. It was a mad scramble. I was ironing my shirt. My iron fell off into a pile of plastic bags, and now the plastic was all melted on my iron. Then when I went to get out of my apartment, there was a power failure, so I was locked in. My car couldn't get out of the garage. I rang up my brother, get me out of here, because I had a wedding to get to, because I knew my wife, my future wife, had promised she would be there waiting for me. Now, she's never been on time for anything before, but she promised me she would be on time for this one. And based on that, I knew she would be waiting for me based on her word, and I needed to get to that wedding to meet her. We go to our grave with only a word to depend on. Jesus says to Mary, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe? We go to our graves with only a word from Jesus to believe. And science can't prove this for us. But Jesus gives us his word that he will be there beyond the grave to meet us. He tells us he's the resurrection and the life. And we have to decide, can I trust this person at his word, and do I believe what he tells me? All right.